Hello, I'm Lee Bailey. This spiral staircase stands in the study of one of the most extraordinary literary figures of our time. At 20, he was an internationally known writer. He is the author of Breakfast at Tiffany's. More recently, he has written a book which many critics have said is the most important book ever put together about a single crime, that towering classic, In Cold Blood. He works in seclusion for months at a time in this Bridgehampton, Long Island studio. But he's also an international power in high society. Truman Capote describes himself as tough, very tough. In a few minutes, we'll meet him and see why this man who writes such exquisite prose may be very tough indeed. This staircase leads to the loft where Mr. Capote does his writing. Bridgehampton is about 100 miles east of New York City, way out on the tip of Long Island. Truman, I've been looking at your chair over there and noticing some rather unusual horns. Can you tell me where those came from?
They're buffalo horns. It's a western chair. It comes from Montana.
The covering doesn't look like it came from a buffalo. What's that?
It's a tiger skin. I had it covered that, and I think it looks like an African chieftain's chair.
What about this big lion rug you've got here? Did you know the lion when he was alive?
I didn't, but he was shot by a friend of mine called Winston Guest, who's a big game hunter. He shot it in Africa and gave it to me for present.
Mm-hmm. I understand you've got a rather nice apartment in Manhattan. What are you doing way out here in the tip of Long Island?
Well, I like it out here, especially. It's, very near the ocean, and it's very pleasant in the summer, but it's where I come to work. This is my studio that I spend a great deal more time here than I do in New York.
You've also got a chalet in Switzerland, I believe. Is that isolated, such as this place is?
Yes, even more so. I mean, it's way on the top of an Alp. It's beautiful. You can look out for 50 miles in any direction, but I also only go there to work.
How much time do you spend working? What schedule do you keep?
I work 8 months of the year, and 4 months of the year divided into periods of 2 months separated. I more or less don't work. I mean, not as intensely. I'm working, but I'm not getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, which I do most of the time. Mm-hmm. And for those 4 months, I work very intensely. I get up at 5 o'clock. I work till 10 or 11. Then I do my correspondence and have a nap, and I live mostly by myself and alone and don't go out at all.
From some of the publicity that I read about you, it would appear that you're quite a social butterfly. Do you think that's accurate?
No, of course not. I have a great many friends, and during the times that I take a vacation from my work, I see them. Mm-hmm. And I devote a great deal of time to them, because that's my idea of a vacation, is seeing my friends and really being able to spend time with them and enjoy them.
Well, do you see the jet set only during your 4-month layoff, or do you see them pretty constantly?
Oh, the jet set. They're only a partial part of my friends.
Truman Capote, a jet setter. Now, if it seems like I'm going off on a tangent, you are partially correct. Actually, this is the starting point of about a dozen tangents. The focus of this episode was supposed to be on Truman Capote and In Cold Blood, both the book and the movie. But I wound up on a road that took me in directions I never anticipated, and there were forks all over the place. In Cold Blood itself is going to generate multiple episodes to cover the story properly. But let's quickly discuss that interview you just watched. And by a remarkable coincidence, that's F. Lee Bailey interviewing Truman Capote back in 1968. F. Lee Bailey became one of the most prominent criminal defense attorneys ever. And if you've been following my episodes about the Sam Shepard murder case, F. Lee Bailey is about to become Sam Shepard's new defense attorney in the next episode and take his appeals all the way to the Supreme Court. That was Bailey's first high-profile case, and it put him on the map, big time. From there, we'll get into at least 3 other classic cases Bailey worked on: the Boston Strangler, Patty Hearst and the Symbionese Liberation Army, and the O.J. Simpson murder case. Truman Capote will also take us into Breakfast at Tiffany's, To Kill a and my number 9 movie of 1976, Murder by Death, which I forgot was all about Truman Capote. I was in high school when Breakfast at Tiffany's came out. The year was 1961, and it was a huge box office hit. Capote wrote the book, or I should say the novella, that the movie was based on. And he started popping up on TV shows left and right. He became a jet setter. Everyone suddenly knew who he was, and everybody wanted to be with him and be seen with him. So let's go back and see just who he was. First off, he was born Truman Persons in New Orleans, Louisiana on September 30th, 1924. His childhood was troubled. His mother divorced his father. She moved to New York by herself, leaving Truman behind with relatives. She married a man named Jose Garcia Capote, a bookkeeper born in Cuba. She then sent for her youngster when he was 11 years old, and the new husband adopted Truman as his son and renamed him Truman Garcia Capote. Wikipedia lists Truman Capote's childhood nickname as Bulldog, which makes me laugh. You just saw him. He always looked, acted, and spoke like a flamer. He usually dressed like a butterfly and pranced around like a ballet dancer, far, far from a bulldog. Wikipedia describes him as an American novelist, short story writer, screenwriter, playwright, and actor. On November 16, 1959, the New York Times published a 300-word article about the unexplained murders of the Clutter family in rural Holcomb, Kansas. The story quoted the local sheriff like so: "This is apparently the case of a psychopathic killer." The article triggered Truman Capote. The New Yorker magazine published In Cold Blood originally as a serialized story in 4 parts beginning on September 25, 1965. Written, of course, by Truman Capote. Random House then bought the book rights and published the book in 1966. I didn't read the book until 19 years later, which was when I began thinking about becoming a crime writer. I bought the book, read it, and reread it many times, and used it as a model and guidebook. In fact, I read it so many times, the cover's gone and the book's dog-eared, but I still have it. In Cold Blood is the second biggest selling true crime in publishing history, topped only by Vince Bugliosi's Helter Skelter about Charles Manson and his family. And by the way, I still have my copy of Helter Skelter as well. Truman's parents divorced in 1928, right after the beginning of the Great Depression. He got shipped off to live with an aunt in Monroeville, Alabama. He was 4 years old, and he moved next door to Nell Harper Lee. They became friends and bonded because they both loved to read. And even though she was 2 years younger, she became his bodyguard. He was a tiny, overly sensitive boy, and the neighborhood bullies liked to pick on him, so she stuck up for him. When he was 8, they started to collaborate on writing stories. She dumped Nell and became Harper Lee, and her father, a well-to-do lawyer, bought them a typewriter to help them out. They remained friends even after his mother reclaimed him and moved him up to live with her in New York. He quit school and skipped college to take a job at the New Yorker magazine and published several articles that caught the eyes of publishers. I never heard of his first book, published in 1948, Other Voices, Other Rooms. The book's main character is based on himself, and the tomboy character is based on his pal, Harper Lee. His success convinced her to move to New York City, where she began working on To Kill a Mockingbird. And that eventual bestseller is based on her childhood in Alabama, and she based the character of Dill Harris on her buddy, Truman. Back to In Cold Blood. After reading the piece about the Clutter murders in the New York Times, Capote convinced his editors at the New Yorker to run an investigative piece on the murder of the Clutter family. To make it shine, he needed help. The timing was perfect for Harper Lee because she just submitted the manuscript for To Kill a Mockingbird to her publisher, J.B. Lippincott & Company, so she had money in the bank and time on her hands. Plus, she'd always been fascinated by crime cases. So much so, she studied criminal law before dropping out of school to move to New York. Capote hired her, and off they went to Holcomb, Kansas. She was a perfect fit because her comforting Southern style overpowered Capote's flamboyant personality with the locals. They performed research during the day, then went back to a small hotel outside of town at night to compare notes. The research lasted off and on for 4 years. During that time, Capote and Lee compiled 8,000 pages of notes. To me, that's super impressive because they didn't have computers to edit their notes, file them, and store their work. Capote and Lee developed relationships with almost everyone who lived in Holcomb and Garden City, Kansas. In such a small town environment, everyone seemed to know almost everyone else and pretty much knew just about everything that everyone else did. And once Harper Lee helped gain the locals' confidence, information kept pouring in, including information from the investigators working on the case all the way up to FBI agent Alvin Dewey and his wife. Harper spent a lot of time with Dewey's wife. They became friends, and Lee made sure the producers of the movie paid her a $10,000 consulting fee. But the key to putting In Cold Blood over the top was Capote's skill in contacting the killers, Dick Hickok and Perry Smith, gaining their confidence, and spending countless hours visiting them in Leavenworth prison to extract the details of the murders. In all, it took 6 years from start to finish. Literary critics praised it as a pioneering work in the true crime genre, and it's often called an original non-fiction novel. The book has a small number of detractors, but for sure, I'm not one. I love the book and the movie, which we'll get into next time. Since we're talking about true crime today, a quick plug for my classic outlaw biker saga and true crime, Born to be Wild, published 30 years ago and still selling. You better get your copy before the supply runs out. So, thanks for stopping in today. Until next time, see you. And that's a wrap.